Hi everyone, today I'm going to be looking at the last beast of the book of Daniel and how I interpret the book of Revelation. Also, the beast of the sea. Ultimately, while the genealogical investigation and the genetic investigation, and I believe that the three beasts of Revelation have a lot to do with the three parts of heaven that God showed favor to in Isaiah. In that day, Israel will be the third party with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth. At some point in the scripture, each one of these kingdoms was cast to the earth. I believe Assyria had its turn first. They were forgiven because they repented at Nineveh, but later they were cast out of God's favor. Then Egypt had their turn. All of this is in Isaiah. And then at the time of the Roman occupation of Judea, the last kingdom of Israel, which was the southern kingdom of Judah, was cast to the earth. The northern kingdom had previously already been cast out. There's a lot of speculation who Shem, Ham, and Japheth are, or who they represent, and I believe that these beasts are the end-time incarnation of the people of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The beast of the sea, which I believe represents Japheth. The beast of the earth, which I believe is Ham. It speaks like a dragon. And let's not forget that the Hittites intermarried with Esau the dragon. Not to mention the Amalekites were descendants of Esau. Amalek was his grandson. And the Ishmaelites, who were from around the same region as the Amalekites, were the descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's other son, with the Egyptian servant of Sarah. And we have the dragon, who is Esau, and the woman, or the whore of Babylon, who is Israel. And they are descendants of Shem. So Esau and Jacob, let's not forget, were the two sons of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Israel was Jacob, but we have the united family of Shem, whose descendant was Abraham. Pictured here in the image of the whore woman, who represents Israel whoring with Babylon, and the dragon representing the Edomite descendants of Esau. If we look genetically at the people who descend from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they all would have had the same genetic origins. Ancient Semitic-speaking peoples, or Proto-Semitic people, were Western Asian people who lived throughout the ancient Near East, including the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Arabian Peninsula, and the Horn of Africa, from the 3rd millennium BC until the end of antiquity. The languages are usually divided into three branches: East, Central, and South Semitic languages. The Proto-Semitic language was likely spoken in 4th millennium BC, and the oldest attested forms of Semitic date in the mid-3rd millennium BC. Speakers of Semitic include the people of the Akkadian Empire, Assyria, and Babylonia. Central Semitic combined the Northwest Semitic languages and Arabic. Speakers of Northwest Semitic were the Canaanites, including the Phoenicians and the Hebrews, and Armenians. South Semitic people include speakers of modern South Arabian languages and Ethiopian Semitic languages. But I'd like to believe that this includes also Egyptian Old Kingdom languages. In Genesis 10, it has the genealogy of the nations, and it says that the sons of Japheth By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families in their nations. So the isles is Strong's Hebrew 339, and it means coast regions, coastlands, or islands. So the sons of Japheth were known as coastland dwellers, or people that live by the sea. They would have been seafaring people. Now when we look at Ham, the Hamites, we have Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. It says that he began to be a mighty one in the earth. So if we look at the Strong's translation of that, it's 776 Eretz, meaning earth or land. So he's a mighty one of the earth or the land. So I'm just going to read this article on the sons of Japheth and his youngest son Tyrus. In Genesis 10:2 are listed the 7 sons of Japheth, the sons that the youngest or the last recorded being Tyrus or Thyris. This list is repeated in 1 Chronicles 1:5, after which there is no further mention made of Tyrus in the scriptures. Neither does the Bible name any of the sons or grandsons of Tyrus. However, 4 of them are given in the apocryphal book of Jasher as Benib, Gera, Lupirion, and Gilak. I also believe that the city of Tyre came from these people and were Japhites. A lot of sources say that they were Canaanites, but it indicates that they were separate people to the Canaanites inland of Tyre. So I do believe that they were originally in the land. They were on the coast, which makes them a link to the Japhite people. They were historically a different culture than the Canaanite people of the Palestinian area. An appropriate starting point in the search for the descendants of Tyrus would be the connection made by Josephus between them and the Thracians. Tyrus also called those Humans, but the Greeks changed the name into Thracians, and that's in Antiquity of the Jews. Asia Minor and Anatolia, modern Turkey, is in the region in which the Thracian ancestors first appear, as might be expected with a westward expansion out of Urartu and Armenia, where Noah and his sons were found after the flood. Tyrus is apparently of foreign derivation and means desire, or Troas, Troia, Troy, Taurus, Turkey, Tharina, Tuscan, and Etruscan are all said to derive from his name. One example of this may be the Taurus Mountains located in south-central Anatolia, which, if actually named after the patriarch, would tend to indicate that the descendants of Tyrus passed that way on their meandering journey westward to the Propontis Sea of Marmara, and to where the ancient city of Troy was to be built. Taurus may well be derived from Tyrus, but its linguistic connection to Troy is less sure. The Trojans were referred to by the Mediterranean Greeks in the Iliad as Keltoi or Celts. The remnant of the Trojans that left Troy and came to Britain via Rome and Africa were said to be sons of Gomer, and who hold themselves to be sons of Gomer to this day. These are the ancient Britons and Celts that today have their most concentrated remnants in Wales. Their history was written by Nennius and Geoffrey of Monmouth, who both confirmed that aspect. The Abe McGregor in the History of Ireland confirms that the ancestors of Western Europe were Gomerites, while discussing the origin of the Milesians from Magog. The Celts are spread all over Western Europe and are mostly R1b Japhites. This aspect is discussed in the paper Sons of Japheth Part 2. Thus, we must assume that the Trojans were comprised of at least two tribal groups, both Gomer and Tyrus, and the nation that fought at Troy were many with many languages, as the Iliad says. The patronymic Trias also seems to have been preserved in the river Tigris, Herodotus' histories, the former name of the Dniester, and the settlement at its mouth, which empties into the Euxine or Black Sea. Another source, however, states that Tigris derives from the Scythian word tura, meaning rapid. The area traditionally occupied by the Thracians is known today as the Balkan Peninsula, although some Thracian tribes seemingly pushed as far north as the Carpathian Mountains and the Dniester River into the region later known to the Romans as Dacia. Thrace was bounded on the west by the Dinaric Alps and by the mountains of the continental Greece in the south, and by the Black Sea to the east. The area roughly encompassed by modern Romania, Moldavia, Bulgaria, eastern Greece, and western Turkey. This was the western area of the Parthian Empire in the Roman period. The Thracians thereby came to occupy the vital access points between Europe and Anatolia, the chief of these being the long Dardanelles Strait to the north of Troy and the Bosphorus, where Europe and Asia Minor are less than half a mile, 700 meters apart at the narrowest point. There was also strong Thracian connections with the Greeks, descendants of another son of Japheth, Javan. The sons of Javan were the Ionian Greeks and are genetically distinct from the mainland Greeks, as we now know. Anciently, the northern part of the Aegean Sea was referred to as the Mare Thracium, the Thracian Sea. According to Homer, the name Thracian first appeared at the end of the second millennium BCE, and during the 12th and 11th centuries, the Thracians settled on some Mediterranean islands before moving into Asia Minor or Anatolia. Etruscans. It has been claimed by MacGyver et al. That Etruscans were descendants of those who had fled Troy following the end of the Trojan War. Dragon then contends that they are thereby descendants of Tyrus, son of Japheth. MacGyver holds that the Etruscans came in the 12th century when the invasion of the Men of the Sea takes place in Egypt. The Egyptian text mentions a people, the Drusa, whom many historians actually consider to be the Etruscan people. Vrasiu discovered astonishing similarities between the Romanian, Albanese, and the Etruscan languages, all three containing words of pre-Roman origin. However, this theory contradicts Herodotus, who said that the Lydians of Asia Minor migrated to northern Italy and changed their name to Thyahenians, from whom the Etruscans arose, and the Lydians were apparently descended from Lud, son of Shem. The Lydians had very nearly the same customs as the Greeks. They claim also the invention of all the games which are common to them with the Greeks. These they declare that they invented about the time when they colonized Thyahenia, an event of which they give the following account. In the days of Attis, the son of Manes, there was great scarcity through the whole land of Lydia. For some time the Lydians bore the affliction patiently, but finding that it did not pass away, they set to work to devise remedies for the evil. The lot was cast, and they who had to emigrate went down to Smyrna and built themselves ships, in which they, after had put on board all needful stores, they sailed away in search of new homes and better sustenance. After sailing past many countries, they came to Umbria, where they built cities for themselves and fixed their residence. Their former name of Lydians they laid aside and called themselves after the name of the king's son who led the colony, Thyahenians. This would also account perhaps for the Semitic haplogroup one in Italy. And Herodotus speaks of the Thracians as being conquered peoples of the Lydian Empire. To complicate matters further, there was also Lud, grandson of Ham and father of Ludum, who occupied the north of Africa directly southward from Thrace. The historical sources place the Etruscans in occupation when their son Aeneas of Troy colonized Rome. They are thus able to be Gomerites. Italians today are Hamitic, Semitic, and Japhetic. Jupiter worshipped in Rome is a cognate of Japheth and is simply ancestor worship of the sons of Japheth. The attires we see above is also most probably the origin of the worship of Attis. He was later found worshipped in Rome during the time of Christ. The Sabines were among the most ancient peoples of Italy, so ancient that Strabo considered them native, and from them many other Italic populations were derived. The Sabines also were an Umbrian tribe. According to some sources, they crossed to Italy from the vicinity of the Sabai River in Paeonia, though others would have liked to consider them as originating from Sparta. In the 8th century BC, the Italian peninsula, except for the southern part where the Greeks began to found colonies, Cuma in the second half of the 8th century BC, Sybaris at the end of the 8th century BC, as well as a few others, was inhabited by the so-called Italic peoples, Latin Umbrians, Sabines, Piceni, Samnites, where the economic and cultural influence of the Etruscans was strong. The Italian territory was composed of a network of indigenous villages. The Etruscans, with their arrival force, favoured new forms of urbanization by aggregating small scattered villages. So it's highly likely that the Romans or the Etruscans were descendants of the Trojan people, who were Japhite, seafaring people, and this is where they gained their militaristic empire from. They mixed with the local tribes that were already populating Italy at the time. And I have a bit of a theory about the Sabine people being of the tribe of Benjamin. So I just want to point out some similarities here between the tribe of Benjamin and the early Roman Empire. And in the book of Judges, it recounts the rape of the concubine of a member of the tribe of Levi by a gang from the tribe of Benjamin, resulted in a battle at Gibeah, in which other tribes of Israel sought vengeance, and after which members of Benjamin were killed, including women and children. Almost the entire tribe of Benjamin was wiped out by the other Israelite tribes. 600 of the men from the tribe of Benjamin survived by hiding in a cave for 4 months. The text refers several times to the Benjaminite warriors as men of valor despite their defeat. And the story in Judges tells of this man, this Levite man, traveling through the country with his family and his concubine, and a gang of men come to the inn and they seek his friend and they want to rape him. And it's very similar to the story of Lot, where he tells them not to be vile and says that he'll give them his concubine instead, and they take the concubine and they gang rape her and she dies. But this war happens, and what happens then is the other Israelite tribes were given at a near loss of the tribe of Benjamin. They decided to allow these 600 men to carry on the tribe of Benjamin, but no one was willing to give their daughters in marriage to them because they had vowed not to. To get around this, they provided wives for the men by killing the men from the tribe of Machir, who had not shown concern for the almost lost tribe of Benjamin, as they did not come to grieve with the rest of Israel. 400 virgin women from the tribe of Machir were found and given in marriage to the Benjaminite men. There were still 200 men remaining who were without a wife, so it was agreed that they could go to an Israelite festival and hide in the vineyards and wait for the young unmarried women to come out and dance. They then grabbed a wife each and took her back to the land and rebuilt their house. So they were allowed to steal these wives. If we look at the story of early Rome, we have the rape of the Sabine women. And the rape of the Sabine women, also known as the abduction of the Sabine women or the kidnapping of the Sabine women, was an incident in Roman mythology in which the men of Rome committed a mass abduction of young women from other cities in the region. It has been a frequent subject of painters and sculptors, particularly during the Renaissance and post-Renaissance eras. And what happened in this story was that, according to Roman historian Livy, the abduction of the Sabine women occurred in the early history of Rome, shortly after its founding in the mid-8th to 8th century BC, and was perpetuated by Romulus and his predominantly male followers. It is said that after the foundation of the city, the population consisted solely of Latins and other Italic people, in particular male bandits. With Rome growing at such a steady rate in comparison to its neighbours, Romulus became concerned with maintaining the city's strength. His main concern was that with few women inhabitants, there would be no chance of sustaining the city's population, without which Rome might not last longer than a generation. On the advice of the Senate, the Romans then set out into surrounding regions in search of wives to establish families with. The Romans negotiated unsuccessfully with all the peoples that they appealed to, including the Sabines, who populated the neighbouring areas. The Sabines feared the emergence of a rival society and refused to allow their women to marry Romans. Consequently, the Romans devised a plan to abduct the Sabine women during the festival of Neptune Equester. They planned and announced a festival of games to attract people from all the nearby towns. According to Livy, many people from Rome's neighbouring towns, including Sinenensis, Crustumini, and Antimnatus, attended the festival along with the Sabines, eager to see the newly established city for themselves. At the festival, Romulus gave a signal by rising and folding of his cloak and then throwing it around him again, at which Romans grabbed the Sabine women and fought off the Sabine men. In total, 30 Sabine women were abducted by the Romans at the festival. All the women abducted at the festival were said to have been virgins, except for one married woman, Ursula, who became Romulus's wife and would later be the one to intervene and stop the ensuing war between the Romans and the Sabines. The indignant abductees were soon implored by Romulus to accept the Roman men as their new husbands. So there's a similarity there between the two stories of the abduction of women at festivals for wives. But the similarities don't stop there. So here we have the crest of the Benjamin tribe, or tribe of Benjamin, and it's a ravenous wolf, the Benjaminite anointing. So Benjamin's described as a ravenous wolf. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey and in the evening dividing the spoil. And then we have the mythological story of the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, and they were twin boys who were nourished by this mother wolf. So Romulus and Remus in Roman mythology are twin brothers whose story tells the events that led to the founding of the city of Rome and the Roman kingdom by Romulus. The killing of Remus by his twin, along with other tales from the story, have inspired artists throughout the ages. Okay, so since ancient times, the image of a she-wolf suckling the twins has been a symbol of the city of Rome and the ancient Romans. Although the tale takes place before the founding of Rome around 750 BC, the earliest known written account of the myth is from the late 3rd century BC, possible historical basis for the story, as well as whether the twins myth was an original part of the Roman myth or a later development in a subject of ongoing debate. Romulus and Remus were born in Alba Longa, one of the ancient Latin cities near the future site of Rome. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, was a Vestal virgin and daughter of the former king Numitor, who had been displaced by his brother Amulius. In some sources, Rhea Silvia convinced them when their father, the god Mars, visited her in a sacred grove dedicated to him. So, seeing them as a possible threat to his rule, King Amulius ordered for them to be killed, and they were abandoned on the bank of the river Tiber to die. They were saved by the god Tiberinus, father of the river, and survived with the care of others at the site of what would eventually become Rome. In the most well-known episode, the twins were suckled by a she-wolf in a cave now known as Lupercal. Eventually, they were adopted by Fastulius, a shepherd, and they grew up tending flocks, unaware of their true identities. Over time, they became natural leaders and attracted a company of supporters from the community. So, in the ancient Hebrew, we have the Mazzaroth, which is the 12 constellations, or what we today call the zodiac. And it says, what is the Mazzaroth? Is a Hebrew word for constellations. Many websites and books on the Mazzaroth describe it as having a gospel message and the signs and meanings of the visible constellations and their deacons, containing many idioms to the plan of God, along with identified with the tribes of Israel. And apparently this is where the original zodiac and constellations come from, is the Mazzaroth. And if we look at the constellation of Gemini, which is the twins, in the Mazzaroth, it equates to a tribe. So there's 12 signs and there's 12 tribes of Israel. And the equivalent to the sign of Gemini, which is depicted by the twins, is the tribe of Benjamin. So we have in the story of Romulus and Remus, the twins who were nurtured by a she-wolf, and we have the story of the rape of the Sabine women, and there's 3 different stories lining up with the tribe of Benjamin. And it's just as a side interest that it's possible that some of those men left the tribe of Benjamin and they founded the city of Rome. I'm just going to read this quote regarding the tribes of Benjamin. Most of Benjamin in the land of Israel was contained within the kingdom of Judah, of which Benjamin and Judah were the major tribes. Nevertheless, a portion of Benjamin was also to be found within the area of the northern kingdom, and these must have shared the fate of their fellow Israelites who were exiled by the Assyrians. Archaeological findings from the city of Marai on the Euphrates River in northern Syria revealed inscriptions that spoke of the Banu Yamina, Benjamin, people in that area. They also speak of Manasseh, Reuben, and the people of Yer, and the Hebrews in general in the same regions. The Talmud, Zabakim 118, says that a strip of land extended from Benjamin into Ephraim and encompassed the tabernacle in Shiloh. The site of Shiloh is approximately in the center of the territory of Ephraim, according to conventional understanding. Shiloh would have been well within the region of the northern kingdom after its succession from Judah. Similarly, the Bible recalls people from Benjamin in the area of Ephraim, or sometimes associated with the Mount of Ephraim with Benjamites. Example is Sheba, son of Bishri, 2 Samuel 20-21, and Benjamite in Mount Ephraim, the second, and Yehuda, Kil 3, conclude from biblical references 1 Chronicles 7:12 and 7:15 that Machir, son of Manasseh, on the east bank of the Jordan took wives from Benjamin, whose descendants may have induced other Benjamites to settle amongst them. Later, the tribesmen of Benjamin in turn took spouses from Jabesh, Gilead, of Manasseh, east of the Jordan, Judges 21. It was Saul of Benjamin who rescued the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead from their enemies. 1 Samuel chapter 11. In the book of Obadiah, verse 19, it says that in the future Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The area of Gilead was east of the Jordan River. It is likely that the prophecy of Obadiah about Benjamin receiving Gilead was based on some past association of Benjamin with that area. At all levels, part of the tribe of Benjamin was also exiled along with the 10 tribes. So if we look at when the 10 tribes were exiled from Assyria, it says the 10 tribes reference to the legend concerning the fate of the 10 tribes constituting the northern kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Israel, consisting of the 10 tribes, the 12 tribes excluding Judah and Benjamin, who constituted the southern kingdom of Judah, fell in 722 BCE, and its inhabitants were exiled by the Assyrians. So after the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes were scattered into the earth, and this is where the story of the lost 10 tribes come from. The Assyrians repopulated the area of the northern kingdoms with other peoples, apparently. So they weren't just remnants of the 10 tribes, but it's believed that the 10 tribes went into all the areas of the world where the apostles went preaching to the remnant of Israel to collect the 144,000. So if the Roman people have a small percentage of Semitic DNA in them from the Near East, I believe that there's a reason for this, and it may be linked to the tribe of Benjamin. In Daniel 7, verse 7, it talks about the terrible beast. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, historically, this has always been referred to as the Roman Empire, and we're giving the clues to the first 4 beasts. The first of the lion being Babylon, second of the bear being Media-Persia, the third being the kingdom of the leopard, which is Alexander the Great's kingdom, which was divided into 4 kingdoms ruled by 4 royal families. And then we have the great and terrible beast. It has 10 horns, so it only has 1 head, but it has 10 horns, so 10 powers. Because if we look at the goat and the ram of the next chapter, in chapter 8, the goat only has 1 horn, and that's 1 power of Alexander the Great, but the ram has 2 horns, and that's 1 power of Media and the other power of Persia. So this Roman beast has 10 regions, or it's 10 empires that it rules, but it doesn't have 10 kingdoms. So it's 1 empire, but it has 10 regions. And with the Roman Empire, that makes sense because the Roman regions were ruled by government procurator. A fiscal procurator was the chief financial officer of a province during the Principate. Between 30 BC and 284, a fiscal procurator worked alongside a legatus Augusti praetor, imperial governor. So Pontius Pilate was a governor, and they would have a procurator, which was a financial advisor, but they didn't have kings. A couple of regions in Anatolia, they had kings. Herod was considered a king, but not all the Herods were kings. When we had the tetrarchs, they weren't kings. So I believe the 10 horns of the beast of Daniel, the terrible beast of Daniel, represents the 10 regions that were ruled by the Roman Empire in the time of Jesus and when Judea was ruled by Jews up until the end of the political Roman Empire. So we have Britannia, Gallia, Hispania, Africa, Egypt, Judea, Syria, Asia Minor, Illyricum, and Grecia or Greece. Now, Britannia came under Gaul. Each of these provinces were ruled by a governor, and he had smaller provinces ruled by a procurator or a prefect. But the governor was the ruler of each region, and the emperor was the ruler of the empire, obviously. So we have, if we count these regions, including Britannia in with Gallia or Gaul, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I believe that these are the 10 horns of the Roman Empire. From the beast of Daniel. The beast of the sea in Revelation is a later time than Daniel's beast. This beast is the political Rome from Daniel 7. The prophecies of Daniel were finished with the end of Jerusalem in 70. Look at this map. We have Britannia counted in with Gaul. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 for Africa, and Syria makes 10, which they haven't included on this map. If we look at the beast of the sea in Revelation 13, it's completely different than the beast of Daniel because it has 7 heads, 10 horns. So it's got 7 kingdoms within its empire. It's got 10 horns or political powers and 10 crowns. And it appears to be a mixture of the beast of Daniel, because we have a body of a leopard, which is the leopard of the Greek Empire, feet of a bear, which is the empire of the Medo-Persians, and the head of a lion, which is Babylonian. This Holy Roman Empire that is on December 25th, 800, it's an ironic date, Pope Leo III crowned a Frankish king Charlemagne as emperor and reviving the title in Western Europe more than 3 centuries after the fall of the earlier ancient Western Roman Empire. So in 476. So I believe that this beast of Daniel, the Roman beast, fell when the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, fell in 476. And then we have this wound that was healed and this revived Roman Empire in the beast of Revelation. And now the beast of Revelation has 7 heads and 10 horns. And this Holy Roman Empire, which is ruled by the Pope, and it has an emperor like the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire may have been destroyed earlier than the 400 date that is officially given to us. There's a belief going around that when Jesus returned with the saints in the clouds of heaven, that the earth, or the known earth of the Roman Empire, was destroyed and burnt. Along with the prophecies of Revelation, the 7 trumpet judgments is the first trumpet, hail and fire, and 1/3 of the vegetation was destroyed. The second trumpet, burning mountain drops into the ocean. A third of the ocean turns to blood. A third of the ocean creatures die. 1/3 of the ships destroyed. The third trumpet, 8:10, star falls into the rivers and springs. 1/3 of fresh water poisoned. Fourth trumpet, sun, moon, and stars turn dark. 1/3 of the earth's light diminished. The fifth trumpet, locusts attack people without seal of God. Unbelievers tormented for 5 months. The sixth trumpet, 200 million horsemen attack people. Half the population of Earth now dead. And the seventh trumpet, angel announces 7 bowls. So there's 7 bowl judgments. Now these judgments happened when Jesus returned. So I think that they may have started around 70 AD. And that may have been a timeline for the fall of Rome, possibly. I think this is where they've altered time. Anywhere from the 1st century to who knows when has been adjusted. Now, I'm not sure if it's actually a whole 1,000 years added, but they've definitely changed the timeline. The trumpet judgments of God seem to be the first period of the book of Revelation, which I believe is divided into 3 periods of time. The period of the judgment of Jerusalem, which is around 70 AD, which finishes with the trumpet judgments. The next section that starts after the trumpet judgment is the new beasts that rise up out of the sea and the earth. And that's in Revelation 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So at this point, the dragon, which I believe is at this time depicted by the Herod family or the Edomite people, has been cast to the earth. After Revelation 12, he gets cast to the earth and takes 1/3 of the stars of heaven, or the third, which is Israel, the rest of Israel who have been cast to the earth. He takes them with him. It says in verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. I believe that this wounded head, a fatal wound, is the end of the Roman imperial political empire, and the fatal wound had been healed because it was revived again in the Holy Roman Empire, where the church and state was united under the papal popes and the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. So in Revelation 6, we start with the seal judgments. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of these seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." So I'm going to try to explain what I think all of these seals and trumpets mean. And later on, I just want to establish who I think the beasts are. This is all my personal research, so I'm not saying it's 100% correct. It's from what I have come to believe. We have the seal judgments. The 144,000 are sealed in their heads. So in Revelation 7 verse 3, saying, "Hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." I think from the time that Jesus was resurrected with the first fruits in Jerusalem till 70 AD, the apostles went out into the places on earth where the lost tribes, when they were scattered by the Assyrians, went. So they went to Asia Minor, Anatolia, they went to Rome and Italy, they went to Greece, they went to other various places where the last remnant of these tribes that are discussed in Revelation 7 were, and these 144,000 remnant of Israel were sealed in their forehead before the judgments took place. But as the Apostle Paul said, they went to the Jew first, or the southern kingdom of Israel that had yet to be cast out of heaven. In Revelation 8, we have the trumpet judgments. It says, "And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound." Now, from the seal judgments, where the 4 horsemen ride, and the trumpet judgments, this could have taken a long time. This may have taken 100 years or more. Who in this time is when Rome was judged. So even after 70 AD, and the 144,000 were still being sealed in their forehead, because we have the time of the Roman emperors and the persecution of the Christians, and that appears to go along with these prophecies about the suffering that the church would have to go through, explained with the letters to the 7 churches. And Jesus told the apostles about the persecution that was coming. The persecution ended with Constantine, who finally put an end to Christian persecution. At the end of the 7 trumpet judgments, we have the 2 witnesses who are murdered in the streets of, well, it says, and their dead bodies lie in the street of that great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So that's Jerusalem. And they rise up again, much to everybody's shock. And after they rise, at the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. It says, "The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe come quickly. And the 7th angel sounded, and there was a great voice in heaven saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and shall reign forever and ever." So in verse 19, again, the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in the temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. So it's at this time, I think, that Rome possibly fell. There seems to be evidence of ancient Rome being destroyed and buried in meters of earth. And I can't understand, if a culture keeps going on, how the ancient buildings would become buried under, 30 feet of earth. That's what the average of a lot of these ancient buildings have been found under, because as a community keeps going, if something happens like a flood or a fire, we clean it out and we remove the rubbish and dig it out, any dirt that might build up around a building. So this happens over time as we clean up any kind of disasters that happen. So it would take a long time for this earth to build up to 30 feet, and people would be living amongst those buildings, cleaning them as they go. So whatever has happened has been instantaneous and completely buried these buildings, which has been impossible for people to clean up, and they've just built over the top of them. So I'm going to play a video from the Conspiracies Are Us channel explaining about ancient Rome. I am not talented enough to make videos like this myself. This is a great channel, and I think they explain this situation, leaving a lot of questions to be answered about this time period.
That was in the first four instances I showed you. And then the last example, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 15 through 16. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven. So again, the imminence, we who are alive, and the manner with which Jesus will return. He descends from heaven, from the clouds with his angels. That's 7 instances. And I just wanted to share that with you because there's many more verses than this. I think there's over 15 that I can think of, but I wanted to share with you these 7, 5 coming from Jesus himself, because there is scriptural evidence that backs this position up, that Jesus actually returned a while ago, and we're on the other side of that. But is there any physical evidence? I mean, it's all well and good. People have different interpretations of verses. Is there physical evidence? And this is where things get interesting for me, because I started by looking into our history. And when you look, and I've covered this before, but when you look at the official history and narrative of the Western Roman Empire, we're told it's a gradual fall over roughly 100 years. But when you start to see images of the Roman Empire, it's completely devastated. And what's interesting about the fall of the Western Roman Empire is you have this 1,000-year period of time called the Dark Ages that happen after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And why that's interesting is because what I'm putting forward is that the Roman Empire was actually destroyed during Armageddon, which was in our past. And these Dark Ages probably weren't as dark as they're portraying. This would have been the millennial reign of Christ. It's just all being misdescribed to us. But as you continue to look into the damage done to what we call the Roman Empire, Rome itself, Italy itself, portions of it completely buried. There was excavations happening for decades, around the turn of the 20th century. But yeah, so you got a lot, there was places buried 20, 30, 40 feet deep. And when they expand their subway lines, they find Roman remains 30 feet deep. This was, they found the ruins of a Roman barracks. So they're continuously finding things 10, 20, 30 feet. And even there's Roman sites all throughout Europe. This one was in Sofia, Bulgaria. They were doing these excavations for their metro, their subway station, and they uncovered this Roman city, and it's buried, 10, 20, 30 feet deep, and they turned it into a archaeological complex. So there's just a lot of buried Roman sites, and I've talked about the many buried Roman bathhouses that they find a lot of times accidentally. The UK has a lot of them. I touched on this one in Amman, Jordan, southern Spain. So the idea that I have is that these weren't just randomly buried because of earthquakes and the like, but the reason why all these things are buried and destroyed is because this was caused by Armageddon, which was in our past. Now, there's been other researchers who looked into the first millennium, the first 1,000 years, and it seems like there's been phantom time placed within that to sort of stretch out the timeline. And when you actually look at what was happening within Rome itself, almost nothing was being built from 300 AD to like 1000 AD. And the only thing that was actually being built, that according to the official narrative, were basilicas, basically churches. But when you look at the churches, whether they said they were built from 500 AD or 800 AD, they looked exactly like the churches from the first 300 years AD. So what I'm putting forward here is, and what this researcher who I covered in this video, the timeline manipulation, the idea, I believe, is that they are falsifying large portions of time in the first millennium. So if there was an Armageddon event, you'd think, well, it should affect other areas, right? You would think it would affect other areas, and it does. I think it does anyway. When you look at the history of Istanbul, used to be called Constantinople, you had these things, structures like the Hippodrome, and you had these harbors, and there's a large portion of the Hippodrome that's buried today, and there were excavations done in the 50s, revealing stadium steps. And there was this port of Theodosius, and I think in 2012 or thereabouts, they rediscovered this ancient port, buried 10, 20, 30 feet. And there's a lot of structures that are buried in Istanbul, and they have different, the official narrative gives different explanations for why all these things are buried, but I think that we're looking at this Armageddon event. That's why. It's just we're given cover story. In my view, we're given cover stories for all these things. And I think the Americas felt the brunt of this Armageddon event as well. And of course, the Maya empire comes to a mysterious end in the first millennium. And large portions of that empire are still buried underneath jungle and who knows how many layers of earth. So I think this was a worldwide event. In India, there were empires that came to an end. This particular empire, they discovered this particular empire or portions of it buried, and they thought these were hills, but these hills turned out to be remains of palace complexes and temples. And you could just see how deeply these things were buried. And I think this was because of an Armageddon event. So it's not only throughout Europe, it's also, I believe, throughout the world, and including Asia and India and the Americas. In the previous video, I also touched on, I think in part 1, this idea of during Armageddon, you would have elements melting with a fervent heat. And I talked about Cappadocia in Turkey. I just wanted to quickly mention there's this valley, the Phrygian Valley, which I think is about a little over 200 miles west of Cappadocia in Turkey. But there are just some really interesting looking formations. They look melted. I just wanted to kind of show these formations because they're just really interesting. But this notion that things could be melted, if that is the case, I think they might relate to this Armageddon event. Now, that leads me right into the idea of the first trumpet and the book of Revelation, because in Revelation chapter 8, verse 7, we have this description of the first angel blew his trumpet, and skipping down a bit, and a third of the earth was burnt up, and a third of the trees were burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. So if this actually happened, and this is in our past, we should see some evidences that this might have happened. And I think that you do see this evidence because all around the world there's these highly fertile soils, usually referred to as black earth or dark earth. They go by different names. In Asia and throughout Europe, there's another type of this black earth called Chernozem. It is one of the most fertile soils used in current agricultural production, and there's a bit of mystery usually surrounding these dark earths. Now, they don't know exactly how these came to be. They have theories, and one of them is that it was formed, these bands of this Chernozem were formed by intensive vegetation burning. So my thought is that these dark earths of mysterious origins, they were created during this Armageddon event. And in the United States and throughout Canada, instead of Chernozem, they call them mollisols. But in a previous video, I touched on a group of researchers who studied these dark earths in the Amazon rainforest, found that here in the US, we have grassland soils that contain lots of charcoal. So you have these highly fertile soils, charcoal rich, highly organic, and a lot of them have mysterious origins. There's theories, like people talk about previous cultures managing the soil, and then that information always gets lost. But the constant is this fertile soil all throughout the world, and I think it's related to this Armageddon event and the first trumpet. And again, in the Amazon rainforest, you have this probability sectional map, but the blue areas indicate where the dark earth sites are likely to be. And this particular soil geographer, William L. Woods at Southern Illinois University, says that this dark earth, or terra preta as it's referred to, it covers a surface area in the Amazon equivalent to the size of France. So there is a lot of this dark earth in the Americas and in Europe, Asia. You can find it in a lot of different places. They're finding it in more and more places. Yeah, there's theories, and one of the theories it's man-made, but there's also speculation that it's been created through natural processes. My view is that these dark earths, they were created during this Armageddon that happened in our past. And what has really convinced me that these dark earths were formed as a result of possibly this Armageddon event, which would have been in our past, is because they find this dark earth sitting on top of a lot of these different sites, primarily Roman sites. Whether the Roman sites are partially or fully buried, with a lot of those sites, they'll find this dark earth sitting on top of those sites. Why that's interesting is because if indeed the Armageddon is in our past, that would have affected what we call the Roman Empire. That would have been the empire that was existing when Jesus would have returned, if indeed that did happen in our past. So the fact you have this dark earth sitting on top of these Roman sites, these partially or fully buried Roman sites, is just another indicator that something significant happened at that period of time. And as I've sort of been presenting here, I think we're looking at the first trumpet, things being burnt up on a massive scale. And this is just one of the indicators, all this dark earth. So, and there's a lot of sites, especially in the UK, during excavations, they'll find traces of this dark earth. So, but I've touched upon that in previous videos, so very interesting. And I think just last year, 2021, they found more of this dark earth at this former Roman site, Vindolanda, and they attribute the dark earth to, I think they attribute it to dwellings made out of wood that were built on top of the Roman site after the fact. But it's just so consistent across all these different countries and continents. I think it's just one major phenomena, but that is my view.
The language in Revelation also, with the third of the green grass burnt up and the trees, is referring to the people of the earth. And this comes to mind in Isaiah, and I'm in Isaiah 14, and it's talking about the king of Babylon in this particular verse, but there's also other verses that talk about the Pharaoh of Egypt and the king of Assyria. And it's on the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil from the harsh labor forced on you, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has come to an end, how his fury has ended. The Lord has broken the rod of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers, which in anger struck down peoples with unceasing blows, and in fury subdued nations with relentless aggression. And the lands are at rest and at peace. They break into singing. Even the junipers and the cedars of Lebanon gloat over you and say, now that you have been laid low, no one comes to cut us down. So it's talking about these nations of Lebanon, and it's talking about them as plants in a garden, trees, juniper, and I know in the one with the verse about Pharaoh, you know, it talks about the forest or the garden, and even in the terms of the grass. If you think about the ecosystem of a forest, you have the tallest canopy trees and the lower level trees, all the way down to the small plants that grow on the forest floor, and everything is protected under the canopy trees, which is supposed to represent the king or the ruler of the nation, which really is a father of a nation and should protect his family or his people. And today we have the Saturnalia worshippers, like the god Saturn, that eats his children, and that's exactly what they're doing to us. They're sacrificing their children or the people of their nations, and I certainly don't consider them my father or king. So when Revelation is talking about these judgments, and it says a third part of the trees were burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up, and the sea became blood, it is possibly talking about a literal burning up of these a third of the earth, but it's also talking about the nations of the earth. So this is a judgment on the nations, for example, Rome. The earth and the sea being opposite to those nations that are in heaven. So I do believe that this was a literal burning, a literal judgment on these nations. And there is evidence to show that it was. But when I'm saying that it's the plants and the grass representing these nations, it's showing that it's a judgment on the Gentile nations of the earth. So check this video out. I'll post the links below. It's worth watching. In 13, the story changes after the destruction of the trumpet judgments, and we have the angels getting ready for the bowl or the vial judgments. And it's at this point that after Revelation 12, we have the description of the woman or the church ready to give birth to the Messiah. So it's explaining the birth of the church through the depiction of Mary giving birth to Jesus, the dragon or Herod trying to murder that baby, but then the dragon chasing the church into the wilderness. And then when eventually we see the whore riding the beast, it's a woman coming out of the wilderness, and I believe it's the one in the same church, and I will explain my belief on that when I explain the Holy Roman Empire. But I just wanted to show how the book of Revelation seems to be divided into three main sections. The first ending with the trumpet judgments and the sealing of the 144,000 and then being taken up to be with Jesus. The second section is the vial judgments, and it says here in Revelation 13, "And I stood upon the sound of the sea, and I saw the beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and his heads the name of blasphemy." Then he sees that they worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Behold, another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake like a dragon. So these 2 beasts are coming up after the Imperial Roman Empire. So therefore they are not the same as the beasts that Daniel talks about. They're different. And we can see depicted by their heads and their horns and crowns that they are drastically different to the beast that Daniel was talking about. So at the end of Revelation 19, we see the end of the second period, which is the judgment of the beasts. And we have the vial judgments that the angels release on the earth. And the wrath of God's judgment, which is the great winepress, or the grapes being crushed and the blood coming up to the horses' bridles. And at the end of all of this, we have the dragon chained. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil, and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. This is when the millennial reign of Christ starts. So from this point, we have 1,000-year reign, or the word millennial in the book of Revelation doesn't necessarily refer to 1,000 years. So if we go to Revelation 20 with the Strong's Concordance, and 1,000 is the Greek word 5507 kilioi. And the definition says 1,000 says properly 1,000, the product of 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 10. So it's emphatic, total inclusiveness, showing no one, nothing is left out. So it could mean a time of a perfect period of time. And it's from the Greek word, the Greek lexicon, 1,000. Strong's exhaustive concordance, 1,000, plural of uncertain affinity, 1,000. So it can also be a plural, meaning more than one. So it could mean 2,000, it could just mean in excess of 1,000. It's not necessarily just one particular 1,000 years. So I'm going to tell you why I think Revelation is broken up into 3 sections. And not only does it appear to be broken up into 3 distinct time periods, it's also set by the 3 fall feasts. And the first feast of the fall feasts, which have yet to happen because Jesus fulfilled the last of the feast with his sacrifice, which was Passover. And after that comes the fall feast. So we have Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. We have Yom Kippur, the Feast of Atonement. And the final of the fall feast is the Feast of Sukkot. And that is the Feast of Tabernacles. The first section of the Bible after the letters to the churches is the Revelation of Jesus, and we have the 7 trumpets, which represent the Feast of Trumpets. And at the end of the 7 trumpets, it says, and the 7th angel sounded, and there was a great voice in heaven saying, the kingdom of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. In verse 19, says, and the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. So this seems to be the end of the trumpet judgments in Revelation 11. And this represents the Feast of Trumpets, this time period of these 7 trumpets blown. This happens, the scene changes, and we have and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun. So it's telling the story of the church and how it starts and how it ends. Because the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. The dragon was cast to the earth. So this happens after 70 AD, when the dragon is cast to the nations of the earth when in the fall of Jerusalem, 70 AD. And then in Revelation 13, we have the beasts coming out of the sea and the earth. So this is a new time period, or a new section of judgment. And the book of Revelation is all about the harvest. You know, we start in Matthew 27 when Jesus is resurrected and the saints come out of their graves, and they are the first fruits. In the first section of Revelation, it's telling us in Revelation 6 that when the seals are opened, and when he had opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd beast say, come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and wine. Now, I've explained this in one of my other videos. This is a description of the harvest periods of Israel. So the first harvest is the barley, and then the wheat. The whole calendar of Israel was based around the harvest, the grains, and it was an agricultural calendar. So, and it's also referring to the workers in the parable of the workers in the vineyard, who the foreman of the vineyard goes out to find workers to bring in the harvest, and how each person was paid the same amount, or according to their work, or according to a price that they agreed on. And some of the workers who come in earlier complain that the ones who come at the last minute get paid the same that they do, but they were paid a penny or a denarius, which, if we look at the Strongs of penny, it actually is referring to the word denarius. So they were paid for their labor in the harvest. So here it's telling us that first harvest of wheat and barley is being paid for. The harvest is being reaped, and that the harvest of the oil and the wine is not yet come. So in Revelation 14, after we've been introduced to the beasts, it tells us, "And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount of Zion, and with him 144,000, having their father's name written in their foreheads." So at this point, the 144,000 have been taken up to be with the Lamb. "And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping and with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the 4 beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which followed the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits." So here it is, being the first fruits unto God and the Lamb. So they are the barley and wheat harvest, the first fruits. "And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, and having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. And they followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she made all the nations drink of the wine of her wrath and her fornication. He'll follow them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascended up for ever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Right blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, with the Spirit, that they may rest from their labours, and their work do follow them. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar which had power over the fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the cluster of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So this is the harvest of the wine. And why does it say, do not harm the wine? Because the angel thrust in his sickle to the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. In Revelation 15, it just talks about the saints in heaven. And it tells us the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. So what were the 7 plagues of the 7 angels? And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go your way and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went out and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worship his image. Now, I'm going to go in and explain this in greater detail in another video. I just want to show the relevance to the feasts. So this is the judgment of the second period and the beasts, because in Revelation 17 it says, And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying, Unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth on many waters. So it talks about the whore that sits on the beast and the judgments. And finally in Revelation 19, we have the judgment on the whore and on the earth, the beasts. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and them that sit on them, the flesh of all men, both free and bond, small and great. So in Revelation 16, it's describing the judgments on the earth. In verse 8, and the 4th angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. Then we have and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and to the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. So that's the battle of Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. He gathered them together into the place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Now, this battle of Armageddon seems to happen in this second period before the millennial reign. So if we are in the little season of Satan, then we have already gone past the period of the battle of Armageddon. Because at this point, the 7th angel pours out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. So this earthquake is greater than the one of the first period of the trumpets. And this is possibly another great reset of when the buildings and what people are possibly referring to as the mud flood, this kingdom was reset after this time, and clearly it was rebuilt potentially in the millennial period. the Feast of Atonement is referring to the blood of Jesus. So those who are followers of Jesus are atoned for by his blood sacrifice. And it's just got some scriptures here relating to the Feast of Atonement. It says Revelation 14:20, and blood came out from the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 200 miles. Now, that's probably a mistranslation because I'll go into this in another video. It actually says 200 stadia, which is referring to probably the size of a Roman stadium. Numbers 35:33. You shall not pollute the land where you are, for blood defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. So in the Feast of Atonement, it says in the pattern of the feast, chapters 15 to 20 in Revelation express different aspects of the judgment that thematically fulfills the Day of Atonement. So according to this information on the Feast of Israel, the importance of grapes and olives is illustrated by the fact that the Essenes had wine and oil first fruits festivals similar to the biblical first fruits offering for grain. These festivals also indicated the relative timing of these crops. New wine festival came 50 days or 7 weeks after Pentecost. Until new wine was offered, no one could drink any of the new juice. So Temple Scroll columns 19 and 21. 14 weeks after Pentecost, shortly before the Feast of Trumpets, was the new olive oil festival. No one could use the new olives until some oil had been offered. The grape harvest was usually completed before Tabernacles, but most of the olive oil harvest came after the autumn festivals. In ancient Israel, the primary harvest season extended from April to November. This harvest period might be subdivided into 3 seasons and 3 major crops: the spring grain harvest, the summer grape harvest, and the autumn olive harvest. The harvests have general correspondence with the festivals. Some grain might be harvested after Pentecost. Threshing and grape picking might overlap. The olive harvest came both before and after the Festival of Tabernacles. The autumn festivals came after the summer harvest, a less important harvest, but fall festivals were associated with greater rejoicing. Deuteronomy 16:13-15. Why the theme of rejoicing? The conclusion of a wine harvest is an appropriate time for festivities. But another reason may be that Tabernacles celebrated both the spring harvest and the summer harvest. Note the mention for both grain and grapes in verse 13. Celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your wine press. So the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. Sukkot is one of the 3 major pilgrimage festivals of Israel, commemorating the 40 years of wilderness wanderings, as well as the completion of the harvest or agricultural year. The Feast of Tabernacles lasts 1 week, beginning on the 15th day of the month of Tishri, September to October, 5 days after the Day of Atonement, and at the end of the harvest. The Jewish people built temporary shelters for the feast to remember the deliverance from Egypt by the hand of God. The Feast of Tabernacles is known by many names: Feast of Shelters, Feast of Booths, Feast of Ingathering, and Sukkot. The word Sukkot means booths. Throughout the holiday, Jewish observers observe this time by building a dwelling in temporary shelters. Just like the Hebrew people did while wandering in the desert, this joyous celebration is a reminder of God's deliverance, protection, provision, and faithfulness. So the observance of the Feast of Tabernacles is recorded in Exodus 23:34. The Bible reveals dual significance in the Feast of Tabernacles. Agriculturally, Sukkot is Israel's Thanksgiving. It is a joyous harvest festival celebrating the completion of the agricultural year. A historical feast, its main characteristic is the requirement of Israel's people to leave their homes and to dwell in temporary shelters or booths. The Jews built these booths, temporary shelters, to commemorate their deliverance from Egypt and their protection, provision, and care by the hand of God during their 40 years in the wilderness. As a feast instituted by God, Sukkot was never forgotten. It was celebrated in the time of Solomon. In fact, it was during Sukkot that Solomon's temple was dedicated. So all the men of Israel assembled before King Solomon at the annual Feast of Shelters, which is held in early autumn in the month of Ethanim. Now, why would that be significant? Because Solomon's temple was the first permanent structure for a temple. Prior to this, in the wilderness, the temple was made as a tent or a booth. So it was a temporary temple. 2 Corinthians tells us, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. So our bodies are considered to be clay vessels. In 2 Corinthians 5 to 13, Paul tells us assurance of the resurrection. So, for we know that our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed. We have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation, which is from heaven. If indeed, having been clothed, we shall not be found naked. We who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be clothed, but further clothed, that morality may be swallowed up by life. Now he who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who also has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always confident knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, yes, well pleased rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Revelation 20 is the fulfillment of the last fall feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Booths. And this is the final chapter of the Bible before Jesus hands everything up to God. The second judgment, the second resurrection happens here. And it says, and they shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. So the camp of the saints, I believe, is those of us left on earth. We are in our temporary bodies that Paul refers to as tents. We are in the wilderness, as the camp of the Israelites were in the wilderness, waiting for Moses to come down from the mountain. We are waiting for our resurrection bodies. And at this point is when Jesus returns, because it says, so they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city. And we are God's beloved city because we are the New Jerusalem. The people are the New Jerusalem. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. If the beast and the false prophet are in this lake of fire, then why would the dragon be Satan in the lake of fire? Because the beasts are made up of a conglomerate of political systems, nations, kings. They are more than one being. In this time period now, all the things that have happened to the whore and the beast have happened prior to our time and have been hidden from us. And this is what we're investigating with the mud floods. And has history been hidden from us? Are we in the little season of Satan? And I think we are in this time period, because what we have to look forward to is that when this people of Gog Magog, or what I consider to be Bolshevism is brought to attack us through the ancient families that are related to this dragon. And even though I say they are the Herods or the Edomites, and I believe they are, these bloodlines also go back to Egypt and way back to antiquity. These families have been gaining control of the earth like Nimrod. They have tried to take control of the people, and they have at times been chained, as the Bible tells us. In this period of time, they have full free reign to do what they will. But it tells us that we don't have to worry too much, because I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And this is the second resurrection. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and the death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. The death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. At this point we see, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So this is the end of time. This is the end of the story of the Bible. At this point we have no more story, because there'll be a new story to be created. And I think we're living in this time period. So I'm going to leave it there for today. The next video I'm going to pick up from this one and talk about the beast of the sea, and how I think it is the Roman Empire, the wounded head of the beast of the sea, which has been resurrected from the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.